Welcome to our Talking Business in China podcast by crayfish.io, a space for an expert's take on growing your business and succeeding in the Chinese market. Your host, Ting Zhang, founder and CEO at crayfish.io.
Welcome to our Talking Business in China podcast. So this is our first episode in 2025. We will talk about UK-China relations in the light of recent positive developments following the Chancellor Rachel Reeves's visit to China. So I thought it would be great today to invite someone who has more than 30 years of experience by visiting China and working in and with China. And also someone who I know very well for nearly 30 years too. So here's a big welcome to Alan Barrell, Chairman of Cambridge Worldwide Associates, an international company consulting, researching, and advising on business and education with special interest in China-West connections and relationship. Welcome, Alan.
Oh, thank you. And hello, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here to talk about this extremely important subject. And I believe Ting is right. This is a very special time to discuss it because government has recently been to China from the UK and there were positive outcomes, which is wonderful for me, since I like positive outcomes. And I'm very happy to share my thoughts and views and some of my experience of what I have learned in the 30 years and why I have become so passionate about wanting to do much more about building good relationships with Chinese people. You know, I'm not a politician and I don't think the politicians are always helpful to us, but that's another thing. We are people. And the people of the world, the citizens of the world, have to find a way to work together. And China, wow, look at the size of China and the wonderful number of Chinese people there. So I'm very pleased to have this discussion today.
Thank you, Alan. You have been a very successful CEO, business leader, and investor and educator. So, Alan, maybe for those who have not known you, talk a little bit about your decades of success career history.
Oh, thank you, Ting. And what you've just said about my broad interests is very important. Before I talk about my history, let me just say that I am working with young people, old people, business people, academics. I'm especially focused at the moment on the next generation of people. I have 8 grandchildren of my own and a great-grandson. So I'm very interested in the next generation. And I'm working particularly on the international front, enabling lots of young people, many of them from China, find their way forward and understand how they might proceed with their careers and their education worldwide. So I'm interested in all aspects of the lives of people. And going back in my own history, my life began in London, and I was educated in the normal way. In my early days, I worked in medicine. I was my first career. I always wanted to be a great doctor. I didn't succeed in that, but I did do a lot in medicine. And I got educated in medicine and worked in the NHS. I became a medical scientist and worked in the National Health Service for some years. Then I worked in the healthcare industry for 20 years. And that was when I began to understand the importance of international business. And I worked in sales, marketing, general management. I lived in America. I went to Europe. I learned about the world. And a little bit later on, after I moved into another industry, I started to visit China about 30 years ago, when it was very different than it is today. There weren't so many roads in China in those days. There weren't so many cars. And when the roads began to appear, it was very interesting that people I took with me to China said, why are there so many roads? This was what, in the sort of 60s and 70s. And there are no cars on the roads. But I said, hey, maybe China is building for the future. And it was, of course, and now the roads are filled with cars. So I worked through the period when really, I suppose we would say Deng Xiaoping was really having a big impact on China, and it was moving into its big growth area. But in 1990s, I started a company in China, which was an electronics company, and I was the chairman of a company based in Zhuhai in Guangdong province. And I started to teach some years before that in the southern part of China in Xiamen, in Fujian province. And Xiamen University is my favorite university campus, even in the world, because it's on the coast and it's beautiful. Cambridge is wonderful where I live, but Xiamen was my first university appointment in China. So as I began to become more and more involved in international business and more of a senior executive, so I began to do more and more in China and learned more about the country and started to do business there, and was also invited and honored to be a teacher in universities. And I got to know China very well. To my shame, I never learned to speak the language. I'm sorry to say to Chinese people listening to this, I am very, very sorry about that. But I learn a lot about Chinese people and Chinese culture. And over the years, I've come to have this sense that between the British, particularly, and the Chinese people, despite the differences in culture, there is a great affinity. I can feel a great affinity with my Chinese associates and friends. I feel closer to the people I work with in China, I have to say this, than my German and French colleagues. Somehow there are connecting cultural and personality features that somehow enable Chinese and UK people, if they make the effort, to work together very, very well. And that's why I've always been so passionate about trying to bring about a situation in which we can all work together better as citizens at every level in society. Not just the government and trade and so on and so forth. Education is another big factor, and I'm immensely involved today in education because, yes, I've had a very successful career. I've been the chief executive of a billion-dollar company. But in my latter part of my career, I've been working much more with smaller companies. And I was very, very delighted many years ago, Ting will tell you how many it was, to meet Ting when she was starting up, and we worked together. And here we are, still working together today. So I'm getting pretty old now. I'm in my 80s. I'm 84, but I'm still very active. And in the last 12 months, I've had more Chinese student visitors come to work with me on short courses in the UK than ever in the past. And we've had to live through the difficulties of the pandemic and all of the things that stopped us closely connecting as we had done for many years. But over the years, I've gained so many wonderful Chinese colleagues and friends, and I've seen bad things in China, and I've seen bad things in the UK. So I've formed a balanced view, and my balanced view has become, obviously, that we have to find a way to work together, not just economically, but as human beings, in bringing together two great countries, one very, very big and more populous, another with a very great history. And if we can bring people together across the continent and the continental divides, we can make the world a better place.
Thank you, Alan. Indeed, I think you mentioned, a lot of passion to support also young people now, because young people is the future of the world. It doesn't matter China or UK. But talking about that support, when I first met you, that was exactly 28 years ago. Well, 27 and a half maybe years ago, when I just came to Cambridge to do my MBA study, and you were really generously helping me in terms of your advice and for my career. And then years later, when I started my consultancy company, again, You were hugely helpful, guiding me at the beginning of the business and support some of the most important projects. So I'm very grateful to your support, and there's a lot others, whether they're entrepreneurs or they are students or they're business people, they all benefited from your advice and generous support. There's a lot we can talk about between UK and China. At the end of the day, it's people like you, like me. We work together and we make things happen. Over the years, we have seen lots of British companies successfully doing business in China, including those companies you led and you advised. And also from my part, I have worked with big companies like the blue chips, FTSE 100 companies, helping them advise them in China. But also now with Crayfish, we work a lot with fast-growing tech companies as well as education institutions and Chinese companies. So I think it's the effort from people like yourself and mine and many others that is keep this UK-China relations going at a business level, at a people-to-people level.
And just to mention, here we are. I am sitting in Cambridge, and Cambridge has become very, very China-centric. We are very fortunate in Cambridge in particular because we have such wonderful investment and wonderful people from Tsinghua, Tuss Park, from Huawei, from Tencent. China has invested a lot in Cambridge, and we have a lot of wonderful Chinese people here. So we're living in a place where there is a very, very good feeling and very, very good relationships about how we may very well do more together to develop those kinds of connections. So that's just an important thing for me these days. And whatever the politicians do and say, we people who are citizens of the world are connecting together and working together. And the young people of China that came here this last 12-month period all seem to come with very positive expectations of the future. So that makes me feel very positively encouraged.
I think now with the current economic situation in China, where we see the growth is, not as fast as previously, the government and also business realize they have to do more in the world, not just within this market itself. And then you will see more business coming out, more people, and of course, young people as well, because their parents are keen to send them out to get a better education, and then they will get better career in China or in other parts of the world. So I was also thinking today we could spend a bit of time talking the challenges, because we know, and there are always opportunities. It's good to talk about what are the main challenges facing us now. Even recently, as we know that from Richard Reeve's visit, there have been some good agreements reached, and it's said it's expected to add 600 million pounds worth of value to the UK economy over the next 5 years, and they could lead to potentially 1 billion delivered value. So this, of course, could mean increased funding and investment opportunities for UK business and possibly Chinese businesses. Although we, don't have a lot of the details at the moment, I guess that at least is a good start. But on a business level, or on a more practical level, we still see a lot of barriers from, in terms of the general perception of Chinese investment, Chinese invest in the UK, but also from the government side, we do see less support, for example, from the UK government side to trade with, to export to China. Because in the past, when we worked with some of the smaller companies, they have funding available to help them to export to China, but now that has not been continued. And so we're hoping that the new government, Labour government, with the latest visit, would lead to more support on that.
Yeah, I do believe it's very encouraging that the visit has taken place quite early in the life of this government. And whatever else we might say, and however many millions or not millions of investment comes out of it, the government has exhibited a much more sensible, balanced view of the need to work with China. China is a very important trading partner already. I think the EU is still the biggest. And the EU, of course, is declining in terms of the problems that we've had since Brexit. I won't get too political, but I thought Brexit was a disaster. And I think China thought Brexit was a disaster because I'm sure that China felt that the UK was a great entree point for the whole of Europe. And I agree with that. And we could have been, and we still could be in a different way. So I'm very encouraged. And I was very disappointed with the last government we had in the UK, where the whole focus moved towards not well substantiated bad things. I won't mention names, but some of the politicians are definitely biased and they will never be balanced in their view. And I was very pleased to be part of an organization that has still an identity. It has slowed down in its actions. But a few years ago, some of us, including Sir Vince Cable, who was the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs in the government we had, which was the Liberal Conservative joint government. He's written 2 books about China, which are very good and sensible books. And we formed the China Insight Foundation, and we wanted to be a think tank which would enable people to find out realities about what is going on in China, not just myths and silly stories. And we are still trying to get the China Insight Foundation going in a much more aggressive way in order that it can be a voice for those who wish to have the balanced view. So things have been done that are sensible, and I think, perceived that the current government and the leaders of our current government are taking a much more sensible, pragmatic, and world sensible view of how we might get on well in the future with China. I think it's a good moment in time for us to renew the initiatives and keep going on the work that you and I and others do in order to build the real relationships, which are relationships between working people, not necessarily between politicians.
Yes, we are waiting for the Labour government to finish the China audit, which has been going on for a while. I have personally been contacted by a couple of people who's helping with the audit for the government. And I think that is overdue, and hopefully that would help the government understand a bit better where we are in terms of resources advising the government and also supporting the business with China. So we look forward to that. In terms of the cultural aspect, we touched upon earlier. Do you see any fundamental cultural differences that would be affecting the UK-China relation in the coming years?
I don't really. I mean, it's astonishing. I haven't told you this, but yesterday I gave a 1-hour talk to 70 Chinese undergraduates from the Beijing University of Social Services. It's a special university. And I could immediately engage with these young people who are all in their early 20s. And I could attach to them immediately in terms of understanding and emotional interest at a cultural level as people. So I think what I find is that at the root of the Chinese people I meet, and certainly the people I value here in the UK, there are values that are quite common. They are values that are very, very common to all of us. And we talk about cultural differences. Of course, China has an amazing cultural history and how it is very different in the UK. But when it comes to values, the issues of trust are absolutely important. Trust is a very, very big thing, as you know, as a Chinese person who also is living here with English persons in the UK. And trust is a word you don't hear much these days. And wisdom is another word. And I think sharing wisdom, real wisdom, is something that we can do with young people, which is what I tried to do. And I found yesterday, within a few minutes, I can relate to these young people. Okay, I know that I'm older, and in China, people revere older people, but I can make contact with them and I can see what touches their hearts. And what touches their hearts is what touches my heart. You know, it is all about human values, and it's about pride. It's about success. It's about how you feel about other people. It's about honor. And so I think if we look at the things that really matter in life and how relationships between people can be built, then I feel very, very strongly an affinity with many of the Chinese people that I meet. It takes time to get to know them. And working with Chinese companies over the years, I worked with Shanghai Energy Corporation for a number of years, trying to get a project going with them. And we got it going. In the end, it was a technology transfer project. But understanding how in large Chinese organizations, the Chinese culture and the Chinese way of doing things operates, and how to really understand what people really feel and think and what they believe they can do and why they might do something or not do something. That's a tough call. There are different ways of people treating each other in China that you have to delve into, and you have to be very, very patient to try and understand why, for example, something doesn't happen and everyone smiles and says, that's a great idea, and it doesn't happen. So it just takes time to understand how in China organizations are differently structured in terms of the way people relate to each other than they are here. Very, very different than American industry, where I worked for 20 years. Even more different to American industry than British industry. But if you have patience and you get to know people well enough and they trust you, you can break through those barriers and you can find a way to work together. But it isn't something that you can learn in 5 minutes. You have to devote time to it.
Yes, indeed. And more than just a little bit time, it needs a lot of practice as well. So, but of course, for business people, they can learn this if they have not been exposed or have little exposure to the Chinese culture and particular business culture. I recently did a workshop with a client who has been, the company has been doing business with China for a few years, but they're now looking to grow more. And then they're looking to commit more resources and sending more people there, for example, engineers and sales people, of course. So I did a half a day with them, talking through the essential Chinese philosophies and also the cultural aspect, like you said. Why is trust important, and why sometimes you think everything's going well at the meeting because everyone's smiling and nodding, and then actually nothing happens. That's because there's a respect and there's a face element. Doesn't necessarily mean there's a business opportunity, even though people are nice and friendly. So of course, there's always ways to navigate the regulations, which also stems from the Chinese culture. Thousands of years of Confucianism means everything is very bureaucratic and top down and hierarchical. So those are the things that having an impact in doing business in China, and indeed makes a lot of difference sometimes for a company whether they will do well or not in China.
Yeah, I mean, when I started my company in China in the 1990s, we sent 2 people from the UK to set it up. And they set it up, they got the equipment working, but it wasn't doing very well after a while. And I went there and I said to my UK managers, what's the problem? And they said, well, it's the people, the Chinese people, they don't learn properly. Things go in one ear and out the other ear. And I got into this in a big way. And I discovered that really there was a big gulf in understanding. And I brought in a Chinese general manager. And we called him general manager, but he didn't know too much about the products or the technology, but he knew everything about the people. And if I took my English people away and we put in all Chinese management, and things eventually and worked extremely well. And he brought me into the company, and the people said to me in the company, you know, we really love this company. We think it's a great company. We want to make it great. We will work if necessary, even, you know, without any more money. But please give some time to understanding us, because we are Chinese people and we have a way of thinking. So in a very short space of time, we made the company 100% Chinese management, and everything went well. And the Chinese manager, the man I put in place, he would call me at home in England and tell me when he had a problem, and we would work to resolve it. But I took time to understand and listen, and not to want everything to be the same way as it might be here. And I did know that other companies from Europe trying to get going in China, particularly the German ones, found it very difficult, because they put German management in place in China. And the German philosophy and the German culture and the German way of doing things is very different. And it didn't work too well. So it takes time and energy, a lot of time, to build the kind of relationships that are enduring for success.
Absolutely. And I think what you described, what you did probably 20, 30 years ago with
Yes, it was, yeah.
is still very relevant to now. And of course, now we see generally over the last 20, 30 years, the trend has been localizing management in China. For most of our clients, they have been localizing the management in China, which really helps to remove that cultural barrier. As long as the management in China, the Chinese management, local team, they don't have such a big cultural sort of misunderstanding with the headquarters. And that's something that we sometimes work with the clients to understand. I'm coming back to the politics. Situation is that UK find itself kind of stuck in the middle between its relationship with US and its relationship with China. And do you think that the UK can manage to balance its position between these two important relations?
I hope it can, and I think that it depends on many of us working hard to make it happen, not just leave it to the government to do it. And I know that organizations like the Royal Society of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce is now trying to help, and you're involved in that, to build relationships in a different way. And maybe if some of us do more work, maybe we begin to do maybe some more publications about the successes that we are achieving. I mentioned the China Insight Foundation, and my friend Hugo de Berg, who is a Chinese scholar, and he has a Disney chair in Tsinghua, as well as being in the UK. He's just written a book called "Who Are We and How Will We Survive in the Asian World?" Because what must not be forgotten is that Westerners are only 12% of the world's population. You know, I mean, we are not the dominant force in population terms. And I think Hugo is very frustrated that we come to this point where very biased politicians, because of the way the West communicates, and social media is not doing a very good job for us in that regard, then the kind of unbiased that starts in one place gets spread very, very quickly. And I think we have to work hard to present a balanced view. We mustn't overlook the difficulties that there are, the problems that exist, but we have to just work hard and keep flogging away at it. And my expectation is that the government we have in the UK today will do better at enabling the building of better relationships with China than the last one could ever have done. And we just have to keep going. We can't give up on it. And there's so much going on at the level of ordinary people and also intelligent people that I'm encouraged to feel that we can perhaps influence the next generation to think more openly. Because the politicians are not really thinking too much about the next generation. They're thinking about, in the UK, especially in Western politics, they're thinking of survival and how they're going to stay in power. I have to remain hopeful. When I see these large groups of Chinese students, like the ones with Newnham College, Cambridge yesterday, there where they were in the room, they are expectant. You know, they're waiting to go into the future. And despite whatever problems they may find at home, even with some of the difficulties of their own education system, because the education system in China is opening up. It's still very, very focused on fill your head with facts. It's not working on Aristotle's principle of light the flame rather than fill the vessel. But it's moving forward, and they're so pleased when they see you bring to them new and open-minded ways of thinking. So there's something happening in the roots in Chinese education that causes me to believe that the next generation there will be very, very expectant and open-minded. And we have to encourage the young people here to think that way. And then maybe more publicly, we can influence the government in understanding our point of view and taking a more balanced view.
That's a very good point on the small number of UK students studying in China versus the other way around. There are 150,000 Chinese students in UK, but there's only a few thousand British students study in China. And as you are passionate about educating the young generation for the future, for both countries, I think it will be very interesting to see if in the coming years there will be more UK students going to study in China. Do you see that's already coming?
Well, I've been trying to bring that about for many years. I sent my own grandson there to have some time, and he thought it was wonderful, and he's now doing a lot of work with some of the people he met there, and it's been great for him. And I don't know why we haven't succeeded more. I mean, when I did a study 20 years ago or more around the schools, and I asked them to tell me what, at that time, I asked a number of questions. One question I asked was, in 5 years' time, what do you believe will be the most commonly sought after foreign language for UK schools? And the majority said Mandarin. But it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. So for some reason, we haven't found a way to get sufficient numbers of young people here to do what sufficient numbers of young people do in China. They come with great English. They learn amazing English. They're interested in the world. They want to hear more about other parts of the world. But not sufficient young people in our country or in Europe generally have that same desire to learn more and to travel more. It's very strange. Well, it's not just strange, but I haven't really understood why.
Perhaps it has something to do with the general negative coverage of China by the media. So when they see, negative reports about what's happening in China, it puts them off going there. So if we in the UK as a country wants to have more resources or more people understanding how to trade or how to deal with China, then need to get more people to learn and understand the Chinese culture, language.
Yes, and it did open up in the days of David Cameron as our leader a few years ago, the golden age, when Mr. Xi Jinping came here, and it was all very positive. Now people criticize that as naivety, which I disagree with. I don't think it was naivety at all. But you're quite right. And of course, in the USA being so dominant in world politics and geopolitics, I don't think the outgoing president has been any better than Trump was or would be. He hasn't been at all helpful, really, in developing the right kinds of relationships and thoughts about China. What Trump will do when he gets back into power, we're not sure. But we have this very, very difficult situation where China is now much more powerful than it was 30 years ago. It is defensively powerful. It's got big armies and navies and many, many more resources than it ever had. So it's seen as a threat. And in some of the talks that I give and have been given for a number of years, I do talk about the damaging nature of trade wars and these kinds of things because they are negative. They tend to not be based on facts. And, when the most powerful nation in the world is driving geopolitics in the way that it's being driven, and Trump may be even worse, we don't know until he gets back into power because he's so unpredictable. And of course, he's now got advisors like Elon Musk, who has a very big investment in China because the Tesla company and all the other things. And Musk himself is not a native American. He's an immigrant. He came from South Africa. So all these things are out there. And if we can find maybe a better way of balance. And I suppose, Ting, I wonder what China itself can do and what the leaders of China might be able to do to enable communication to flow in a better way from their end and enables people like you and me to present them in a more positive light. It's
yes, absolutely, because it needs two to tango, and Chinese or the Chinese ways of interacting with either people or business or other governments are very different, and there's a lot of phase aspects, and sometimes it's not always straightforward. Although in the US they do have a lot more Chinese speakers and a lot more Chinese think tanks, there's a lot more happening in a sort of business or academic level looking at China. But as a country, because there's so much competition, UK is not really competitive to China on a scale, even though it's a certain technology, of course, but as an economy, the volume is just not comparable. But US, China are similar.
And you're quite right. Some of the leaders of the biggest companies, NVIDIA, for example, in China, I think in America and worldwide, I think the leader of that is Chinese. And there are a lot of Chinese business people in big positions in American companies.
Yeah,
So,
and also I'm also saying that there's a lot more Chinese, US, for example, young people, business people who can speak Chinese. When I traveled to US, only a few times in the past, I was actually very surprised. There's a lot more people I met. They're American people. They're not immigrants, but they can actually speak Mandarin, and they're very keen to learn. I was quite surprised because in the UK, we occasionally I meet some British who can speak Chinese, and typically it's related to their career. But in the US, I met people who actually not doing anything work-wise related to China, but they actually keen just to learn Mandarin. So I wonder, but that's something the UK government really should be looking at.
yes, there's a lady that I'm working with here that you have met. Minji Chu, who runs a company called Creative China Class. Her husband is an Englishman. He's with the Open University, and she works with US parents and kids who are all learning Mandarin and want to relate to China, and with Chinese families who want to relate to the West. But she hasn't managed to get so much interest in the UK. It's
That's
very,
exactly
very
my
strange.
point.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what we do. That's what the China Insight Foundation was planning to do. And Hugo de Berg, the founder of it, founded the first real dual language school in London. The Kensington Wade School is English Mandarin from day one. They learn both. So there are people trying to do things, but it's not so many, and it's very isolated. I'm not sure. We here in Cambridge are different in the sense that we are so connected with so many Chinese things, and Chinese people are all around us. But in other parts of the UK, it's not the same as that.
Yeah, I think in big cities like London and Manchester and Birmingham, when there's a bigger Chinese population, you will probably see more
Yeah.
connections and things happening. But if we go beyond those big cities, then the people who understand or who would be interested in knowing more about China are a lot less. And this is something that I wonder somehow would change in the coming years. And how could that happen? The fact that we are sitting here and having this conversation is helping because we will be broadcasting to people across all channels. So hopefully get more people interested in thinking China is so important, not just the second largest economy, but it's also because the population and because it's one of the oldest civilizations in the world. So for anyone, whether it's for career, for education, for interest, China should be something worthwhile for them to.
Yeah, I agree with you. And in a recent Economist article, they made the comment, and they wrote about this in some detail, that in some ways, China has become the innovation lab of the world. A lot of companies and whatever we think about China, an enormous amount of work is going on in China to turn ideas into products, and a lot of international companies are investing in that in China. So we should be very aware that abilities and creativity possibilities in China are very, very great indeed. And I don't think the West has caught up on the real understanding of what has gone on in China, and it has been through some difficulties. But America, of course, has always fought towards this position where maybe China could be caused to become a democracy, which it never will. And there's no understanding much in the US, I think, that there are other systems than what they call democracy, whatever they think it is, that have survived over the centuries.
Or you never be a democracy in a definition
of ours, yeah.
Of the West, yeah. So I guess I would like to just end our chat today, the conversation, with some predictions, perhaps for 2025. Do you see from your work involved or your connections, your activities with China, particularly, of course, on the education, but also on business side? Are you anticipating some significant improvement, changes?
Well, what I see as I sit, and I've got Chinese students, some of whom are studying in Cambridge, some in Oxford, some in London. I found the last year, the year of 2024, extremely encouraging, because after the pandemic, things slowed down. We didn't have visitors here. I've had so many groups of wonderful young people from the age of 9, from high schools, 16 years old, and from undergraduates and other groups. I've had executives coming here in September last year from China. And what I see is an open-mindedness and a willingness to work together amongst those people that gives me the opportunity to do more of the things that I feel I can do. And as you know, like your company, we also have our other companies here, China Future Creative Class. We bring lots of Chinese students here. We're giving them exposure to the UK. We would love to take more European students to China. We would like to do that. We might go on and do it. So I see a glimmer of hope in recent activities of our government and some other European governments, that there will be an attempt at least to embrace something approaching compromise with China. I haven't seen the West take the view that China is really anti-West warlike at all, because China never has actually been terribly warlike internationally, if you look at history. Mm-hmm. So I am hopeful that if we keep going and build on the things we can do and see where and when we can influence government positively to think openly and creatively, then step by step, we may be moving towards maybe 10 years of progress, but it will be step by step, and it will not be a dramatic move in any direction. I think one other thing I suspect, things may not be quite so bad with Trump as people are thinking. Let's wait and see. But I'm hopeful and expectant. I have to be. Pretty well the most populous, or one of the two most populous nations in the world. We have to find a way to work together with them.
Definitely. Well, at least from what I can see from our clients, from the companies we talk with, they all seem to be more optimistic.
Yeah.
And they are making plans to invest in China or stepped up their efforts, and they have better hopes. And we are working with a number of clients at the moment to do that. So, and of course, we would like also to make more business or more people to be aware that there's a lot more opportunities they can for their business and for their institutions. Well, yeah. Chinese New Year's are coming very quickly, and it's Year of Snake, and snake is very smart in the Chinese culture. So and it's good for the business. The snake is also known as a small dragon, a little dragon. So I think in the Chinese general cultural expectation that the 2025 also will be better. So thank you, Alan, for your time. I know we can talk for another few hours, but for today, let's just say we will work together more closely in 2025 to make things happen. And
we are.
And we'll see you soon.
That's all for today. Thank you for listening to our podcast, Talking Business in China, hosted by Ting Zhang. If you like this podcast, subscribe, like, and share. We discuss all aspects of driving business growth in China. Your comments, suggestions, and questions are always welcome. Do get in touch. Our website is crayfish.io and our email address is hello@crayfish.io. You can find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and X too. It's crayfish.io.